So, a spectacular political development coming out of the United States, one that was in the making for several weeks. For President Joe Biden deciding not to run for election again. He has chosen not to run for a second term and will not be facing off with Donald Trump in the elections in November 2024. This has left a wide open gap in US politics. Of course, he has endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris to be the next nominee of the Democratic Party to take on Donald Trump in 2024. But joining us now to discuss the implications of this decision from President Biden and to discuss a little more of the Biden administration's record on India, we have former Ambassador of India to the United States, Ambassador Meera Shankar. Ambassador Shankar, just your opening reactions to this decision by President Biden to step aside and not run for a second term.
Well, I'm relieved in the sense that he was at a serious disadvantage after his performance in the presidential debate, with his numbers in the polls falling very rapidly. I think the Democratic Party was worried that had Biden continued, they might have lost not only the presidential election, but also elections to the House of Representatives and the Senate, thereby, having no checks and balances on a potential Trump presidency.
Mm-hmm. And if I could ask you, in terms of President Biden, he's of course been in office since 2021. Could we begin by understanding from your end how you have seen his record on international relations, on foreign policy, and more specifically on India as well?
Well, I think Biden was a good president. It's just that his age has become such a strong factor of concern. So if we look at his record, the US has done economically the best out of any of the developed economies, though there have been concerns about inflation and high interest rates. Unemployment has been brought down to the lowest levels in recent years. It was 3 point something. And growth has been robust. Now, of course, there are signs that inflation is also being tamed. So all in all, a reasonable record on the economy. On climate change, he was far more forward-looking than Trump, rejoining the Paris Agreement and apportioning funds for a green economy in the US. Perhaps not to the extent that he might have liked because of budgetary constraints imposed by Republican opposition, nevertheless a fairly substantial allocation. Again, on foreign policy, he brought America back to the world. Trump had a more isolationist foreign policy, saying, his own emphasis was America first, and that is what was going to drive policy. So traditional alliances were kind of upturned during his presidency, and a more transactional US approach became visible throughout the world. So Biden's efforts were to restore the presence of the US in a more substantial way in international affairs. He reassured and rebuilt the alliances, set up or elevated the Quad to a summit level in the Indo-Pacific, also set up AUKUS. So, and then, renewed the defense treaty with the Philippines. So shored up alliances, set up the Japan, South Korea, US trilateral, set up the other, Israel, India, US, UAE grouping in West Asia. So did a lot to build institutional linkages for the US across the world. I think on Ukraine, India has had differences with the US. And we believe that there is not going to be a final outcome for either side through the use of arms and force, and that the only way forward is to end the military conflict and have negotiations. And there, perhaps, we might find that Trump will take a more pragmatic view on the Ukraine crisis. His own vice president has also been someone who opposed aid to Ukraine from the Republican Party in Congress. So there is one place where we might see a more pragmatic approach. On Israel, Biden has supported Israeli action in Gaza, but also tried to put pressure on Israel for permitting more humanitarian aid and minimizing civilian casualties. He's also stressed that a two-state solution is perhaps the only way to have long-term peace. Of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu has ignored much of the US coaxing or urging, because there's a presidential election around the corner, and Trump certainly would back Israel in a more forceful way and perhaps do little to pressurize Israel to move on the issues that Biden has been doing. So overall, I would say that Biden had a good record, did well for the US, but in recent months, concerns about his ability to handle the stresses of a post like that of the US president and be in command of the situation have grown, especially after he was seen fumbling and looking confused during the US presidential debate.
If I could ask you more specifically on his policy on India, Biden's policy on India, we've seen a lot in the last couple of years, whether it's on defense technology with the General Electric, the fighter engine deal. We've seen conversations on advanced technologies with the much wanted ISET scheme. There's been conversations, of course, of a strengthening Quad. The first leaders summit of the Quad, of course, happened in 2021. But there have also been, of course, on the negative side of the ledger, some difficulties over issues like the Pannu assassination controversy, periodic American interventions on India's domestic politics. Could I ask you to give us a sense of, has Biden been good on India? Has Delhi found it reasonably easy to work with him?
I think Biden has stabilized the U.S. India relationship and solidified it. It's a relationship which enjoys bipartisan support in the US and has been built by both Democratic and Republican administrations in the past. But Biden has elevated it to a new level. I think the Quad itself has been elevated to summit level, and India is very much a part of the Quad. Bilaterally, Biden has, set up a much stronger area of cooperation in defense production and sharing of defense technology, including what you mentioned, the GEHAL deal for building a fighter aircraft jet engine in India, and for transferring 80% of that technology to India. Also, the whole initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which looks at an Indo-US partnership in the areas of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 6G telecommunications, and space. I think this was a very major initiative. Of course, it's still to really get off the ground, but we've seen some progress in the area of, computer chips. where Micron has promised to set up an investment here for doing the final packaging and casing. And of course, Tatas are doing something more substantial with Taiwanese companies as partners. But I would really say, and of course, the economic relationship has grown manifold. Many of the economic disputes between India and the US during the previous Trump presidency have been settled. I think 6 or 7 WTO disputes have been settled between India and the US under the Biden presidency. And trade in both goods and services has reached $200 billion. So that's a substantive growth in economic cooperation. I would really say that Biden has steadied the relationship. And while there were concerns about human rights and the possible US intervention under a democratic administration on these issues, actually the Biden administration has tread quite cautiously on these issues. They have, even on the Panoon issue, other than the fact that there is a case against Gupta, which is ongoing in the US, and they have sought his extradition, the discussions have been in private with the Indian government. And today we have a statement by the NSA, Jake Sullivan, that discussions on the Panoon case with the Indian government have been confidential and have been substantial and effective. We really don't know what that means, but they have not really used a megaphone on the issue.
Understood, ma'am. If I can ask you that question, just to narrow down a little bit on this question of human rights and democracy, because I think this is something that an Indian audience often has some questions on, which is that when the elections were going on, the US State Department, of course, commented on the arrest of Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal. You also had their statement on certain tax cases that the opposition Congress party was facing. The Ministry of External Affairs had responded, called those statements unacceptable, and this is something that we see time and again. You have comments on religious minorities. But also at the same time, so for some Indians, it seems like, okay, there's a lot of political interference coming from the United States. But I was talking to someone from Washington the other day who was saying that, look, if you're in Washington, if you try to get anyone to talk about issues related to India on human rights and advocacy, there's just very little traction for it, because no congressman, no senator, and certainly not the White House wants to push these issues, because they want to keep these issues on the back burner when it comes to talking to India. They want to focus on the substantive agenda, and they know that India doesn't necessarily appreciate those interventions. So there are two separate sides of this debate. One side that says there's too much interference, another side that says that actually the Biden administration has kept those things, has managed those things fairly well. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
I would say that they have really tried to tread cautiously. One is to be sensitive to their domestic constituency, especially the progressives in the Democratic Party who want a stronger posture on these issues. The other side is the substantial relationship with India, which is the priority for the US. Between these two, interests or constituencies, if you will, the administration under Biden has navigated a fairly careful position. Sometimes I feel we in India are a little over prickly on these issues. I mean, if you look at how the US has applied pressure on other countries, whether it is Bangladesh or whether it is, let's say, China, or whether, Russia, on human rights issues, then I think we see it in perspective and proportion. And then I would say that India has got off lightly.
If I could ask you now about what comes next in terms of Vice President Kamala Harris is, of course, picking up endorsements thick and fast, including from some of the people who were thought to be her challengers. So it seems like she's looking to step into the vacuum and fill up that gap as Democratic nominee in the upcoming elections. Could I ask you how her foreign policy will shape up, because I think Indians have a sense of her, but not a sense of what she stands for on the international stage. Do you have a sense of what she might stand for in global policy and on India?
Look, as Vice President, Kamala Harris has followed Biden. She has not striven to strike out an independent role for herself. She has followed Biden's foreign policy fairly closely. So I would expect continuity there. And I would not expect any major or radical changes if she becomes the nominee and if she wins the presidential election. With President Trump, if he becomes the president, there could be shifts in nuance. He would still seek to build the relationship with India because he sees China as America's foremost challenge. But he's not been in the past as systematic and institutional as Biden in building up coalitions to handle these issues. And on issues such as transfer of technology, cooperation in the area of defense production, overall on the issue of trade, we might see differences emerging from the previous Biden policy. Certainly on climate change, you're going to see a difference because Trump is likely to pull out of the Paris Agreement again. On Ukraine, you might see some positive movement in a pragmatic direction. So the differences over Ukraine with the US, which have been there, could become less sharp. And it might still become easier for India to navigate its relationship with both Russia and the US under Trump.
Understood. Ambassador Shankar, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for helping us unpack the relationship as well as what Biden's decision to bow out now means for America, for India, and for the world. Thank you so much, Ambassador Shankar, and thank you so much for watching India Today Global.